The porter said, "Well, I will call out one of the virgins of this place. If she likes what you have to say, she will invite you to join the rest of the family according to the rules of the house." So, watchful, the porter rang a bell. At the sound of the bell, a serious but beautiful young woman named Discretion came out of the door of the house and asked, "Why have you called me?" The porter answered, "This man is on a journey from the city of destruction to Mount Zion, but he's weary, and seeing that the sun has set, he asked if he might stay here for tonight. So I told him I would call for you, and that after talking with him, you would decide what seems best according to the rules of the house." Then the young woman asked Christian, "Where are you from, and where are you going?" He told her, and she also asked him how he got into the way, and he told her. Then she asked him what he had seen and met with in the way, and he told her all that as well. Lastly, she asked his name. He said, "My name is Christian, and I have a greater desire to stay here tonight, now that I understand this place was built by the Lord of the hill for the relief and security of pilgrims." So she smiled, and tears brimmed in her eyes. After a slight pause, she said, "I will call for 2 or 3 more of the family." So she ran to the door and called for Prudence, Piety, and Charity, who came out to meet him. Following a little more conversation with him, they invited him inside to meet the rest of the family. Many of them met him at the threshold of the house and warmly welcomed him inside, saying, "Come in, you who are blessed of the Lord. This house was built by the Lord of the hill, specifically for the purposes of entertaining pilgrims such as you." Christian bowed his head in respect and followed them into the house. Once inside, he sat down and they gave him something to drink. They agreed that until supper was ready, to make the best use of time, some of them should have a conversation with Christian regarding specific matters. So Piety, Prudence, and Charity were chosen for this discussion, and they began to talk with him. "Come, Christian," Piety said. "Since we have shown love to you and received you into our house tonight, let's talk about all things that have happened to you in your pilgrimage. Perhaps talking about these things will help us better ourselves." "I'm thankful for your goodwill, and I am glad your attitude is so friendly." Piety asked, "What made you decide to take a pilgrim's life in the first place?" "I was driven from my native country by a dreadful message that unavoidable destruction would consume me if I continued to live in the city of destruction." "But how did it happen that you came from your country in this direction?" she asked. Christian told her that it was what God wanted. "For when I was fearful of destruction hanging over me, I did not know which way to go. But by chance a man by the name of Evangelist came to me as I was trembling and weeping. He directed me to the wicket gate. If he hadn't, I would never have found it. And so he pointed out the way that has led me directly to this house." Piety's brow furrowed in thought. "But didn't you come by the way of the house of the interpreter?" Oh, yes, Christian nodded, eager to share the experience. The things I saw there are most memorable. They'll stick with me as long as I live. Three of the things I saw especially made an impact. The first is how Christ, in opposition to Satan, maintains his work of grace in the heart. The second is how the man in the iron cage had sinned himself quite out of hope of God's mercy. And the third is the dream of the man who thought in his sleep that the day of judgment had come. Did you hear him tell his dream? Yes, Christian said. I thought it a dreadful revelation. It made my heart ache as he told it, and yet I am glad I heard it. Was this all you saw at the house of the interpreter? Christian shook his head. No, he took me to a place where he showed me a stately palace, and how the people in that palace were dressed in gold. Then a courageous man cut his way through the armed men who stood at the door to keep him out, and once he did, he was commanded to come inside and win eternal glory. My heart and mind were totally overwhelmed at the sight of these things. I would have stayed at that good man's house for a year, except I knew I had farther to go. What else did you see along the way? See? Well, I had only gone a little farther when I saw one, as if in my mind, hanging upon a tree bleeding. The very sight of him made my burden fall off my back, for I had groaned under a very heavy burden, but it dropped off my back just like that. He snapped his fingers. I had never seen such a thing, and it surprised me. While I stood looking up, for I couldn't stop looking, three shining ones came to me. One of them declared that my sins were forgiven. Another stripped off my rags and gave me this embroidered coat I'm wearing. And the third set the mark you see upon my forehead and gave me this sacred scroll. He pulled the scroll from his pocket and showed it to her. But you saw even more than this, didn't you? Christian thought about it for a second and said, the things I have told you were the best, but I did see some other interesting things. For instance, I saw three men, simple, sloth, and presumption, lying asleep beside the way by which I came. They wore shackles upon their heels. But do you think I could awaken them? It was almost impossible. I also saw formalist and hypocrisy come tumbling over the wall instead of entering by the wicket gate, and they pretended to be headed to Zion, but they were quickly lost. And even though I warned them, they would not believe. However, the hardest thing for me was getting up this hill, and it was equally difficult to muster the faith to get by the mouths of the lions. I'm telling you, if it hadn't been for the good man watchful, the porter who stands at the gate, I'm not sure that I wouldn't have gone back down the hill. But I thank God that I am here, and thank you for receiving me.